All right, let's dive in. Another deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
This time, we're tackling a case that just won't quit. The Black Dahlia.
Yeah.
I mean, decades later, and it still grabs you.
Right.
We've got a mountain of stuff here. Newspaper clippings, books, even some files.
Yeah.
Declassified police files. And it's some seriously creepy stuff.
It is.
So we're going to try to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
The suspects, the theories, that whole media circus that went along with it.
Mm-hmm.
See if we can understand why this case, even after all these years, is still such a puzzle.
Absolutely.
So set the scene for us.
Okay, so picture L.A.
Guys?
January 1947.
Right.
The war's over, but there's a different kind of darkness hanging over the city. It's a chilly morning, not really your typical California sunshine.
All right.
Betty Bersinger is walking with her little girl, 3 years old, along Norton Avenue in Limerick Park. Quiet residential area.
Okay.
But then something in a vacant lot catches her eye. Something white, almost like a mannequin, but broken at the waist. Curiosity gets the better of her, so she walks closer.
Yeah.
And then, well, the blood drains from her face. It's not a mannequin, it's the body of a young woman cut in half and posed, her skin so pale it's almost white. The victim's naked. She's been cleaned meticulously and drained of all her blood, which is why she's so pale, almost ghostly. Arms are stretched above her head, elbows bent, legs spread apart. Her face, a face that was probably full of life, maybe even dreams of Hollywood stardom. It's a mask of horror. This awful Glasgow smile carved from the corners of her mouth all the way up to her ears. Deep cuts, surgical-looking cuts on her body, slices of flesh taken from her thighs and breasts, and even her intestines, they've been tucked under her. Ugh. It's a scene designed to shock, to horrify.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, there's no blood, none at the scene. The killer cleaned everything, the body, the area. It all must have happened somewhere else.
God, that's brutal.
Yeah.
And of course, the press, they're all over it.
Oh, yeah.
A story like this,
Like sharks.
cameras flashing, reporters scribbling away. Everyone wants the gruesome details.
Mm-hmm.
They identify her as Elizabeth Short, 22 years old, aspiring actress. Came to Hollywood, looking for fame, fortune, and instead, well, this.
It's a classic Hollywood story, just not the ending anyone expects.
And that's how the Black Dahlia is born.
A nickname, courtesy of the press.
Cementing her place in true crime history.
Yeah.
Okay, wow, just hearing you describe it, it's chilling. The planning, the staging, the sheer brutality, just unsettling.
It really is.
But it's that contrast that really gets to me, the horror of it all, and then how carefully it was all done. It's like the killer wanted to shock, to terrify, but also be in control. Like a twisted artist showing off their work.
You're right. You're absolutely right. The lack of blood, the posing, these details, they tell us something about the killer. It's more than just violence. It's deliberate. There's a message there.
Yeah, a message for whoever finds her. It's chilling,
Yeah.
almost theatrical. And speaking of messages, weren't there those letters to the press?
Oh, the letters.
The one sent to the Examiner. Those always creep me out.
Oh, absolutely. They're a key part of this. A few days after they find the body, the Examiner gets this envelope. Inside, Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, some business cards, photographs. All cleaned with gasoline.
Just like her body.
Exactly. And with it, a letter made of words cut out of newspapers and magazines, bragging about how much fun the killer's having, how the police are clueless. It was like the killer was enjoying the attention, using the media to taunt everyone, the cops, the public, everyone.
God, that is it's bone-chilling. Imagine being the detective on this case. Reading those letters, knowing you're dealing with someone who not only does this, but gets off on the fear they create. Did those letters give the police anything real to go on, or were they mostly just taunts?
Mostly taunts, sadly. More about messing with their heads than giving clues. The killer even sent more packages with more of Elizabeth Short's things, all carefully cleaned with gasoline. This cleaning, it's a theme, like they want to erase themselves, but also drag out the investigation, keep everyone on edge.
So from day one, the killer's playing games, controlling the story. And the media, well, they're eating it up. I bet that made things hard for the police, huh?
Incredibly difficult. Remember, this is 1947. Forensics it's in its infancy. The LAPD, they're under huge pressure to solve this. And the media, while they're spreading information, they're also creating chaos. Rumors, speculation, everywhere. Trying to separate real leads from all that noise must have been a nightmare. And sadly, all that frenzy, it also helped create these myths about Elizabeth Short herself.
Oh, you mean those rumors about her being a prostitute? I thought those were debunked.
completely unfounded. The press, they love a story, right? And they went with this image of her as this promiscuous party girl prowling Hollywood Boulevard. But the truth is, there's no proof of any of that. Later investigations, even a grand jury, they all confirm she wasn't involved in prostitution. It's sad how fast speculation and sensationalism can bury the truth and really hurt the memory of a victim.
Yeah, a good reminder that even when you're trying to find justice, you have to be careful not to buy into stereotypes, not to forget the real person at the center of it all. But before we go too deep into that, let's get back to the investigation. You said the LAPD, they threw everything they had at this case. What were some of the first leads they followed?
Well, they had over 750 investigators on this from all over, even the FBI. Interviewed hundreds of people, chased every lead, no matter how small, but it hit a wall, and fast. The killer, they were careful, they didn't leave much behind.
So even with all those resources, all those people, the Black Dahlia's killer just vanished. But there must have been some people who really stood out as suspects, right?
Oh, there were suspects. Plenty of them. A case like this, it attracts attention seekers, false confessions, but there were a few who were, well, intriguing. Some of their stories are almost as fascinating and disturbing as the crime itself.
Well, in that case, let's hear about them. Who were these prime suspects and what made them so interesting to the investigators?
Well, one name that came up right away was Mark Hansen.
Hansen?
Yeah, remember that address book they sent to the Examiner? It had his name on it, and Elizabeth had stayed at his place a few times. He was a nightclub owner, wealthy, connections. You know the type.
The classic noir, shadowy figure, maybe mixed up in the young starlet's death. Do they have anything solid on him, though?
Not really. He said he just gave her the address book as a gift, and they couldn't connect him to the murder itself. But years later, there's this other theory that puts him back in the picture, but in a different way.
Okay, now this is getting interesting. What's this new theory, and who came up with it?
So there's this author, Pugh Eatwell,
Okay.
wrote a book, Black Dahlia, Red Rose.
Okay.
And she has this, well, it's a controversial theory.
Right.
She thinks Hansen might have arranged the murder, but didn't actually do it himself.
He hired someone.
Yeah, someone who knew how to do something like that. Gruesome, precise, the whole thing.
Okay, I'm all ears. Who does she think he hired?
Her theory focuses on this guy, Leslie Dillon. He was a bellhop and, get this, a former mortician's assistant.
A mortician's assistant.
Yeah, and that combination, it's pretty chilling when you think about how Elizabeth Short was killed.
Yeah, no kidding.
Eatwell's argument is that his background, Dillon's background, it gave him the knowledge, right? He knew about surgical procedures, how to handle bodies, prepare them, stuff someone without medical training wouldn't know.
That's a disturbing thought. So she thought Hansen hired Dillon to kill Elizabeth Short. Why, though? Was it just because of his background, or was there more to it?
Well, she suggested that Hansen might have had a motive, jealousy, maybe revenge, maybe Elizabeth rejected him, or there was some other conflict between them. Whatever the reason, she paints Hansen as this guy who, well, he was used to getting what he wanted. Didn't matter who got in his way.
And Dillon, with his particular skills, was the unlucky guy who got caught up in it. It's a very Hollywood noir scenario, isn't it? Did she find any actual proof to back this up?
Well, one of the things she points to is that when the police questioned Dillon, he seemed to know things about the crime, specific details that hadn't been released to the public. For example, she claims he knew about a rose tattoo on Elizabeth Short's thigh, a tattoo that was cut off and put inside her.
Hold on, he knew about the tattoo that was removed?
Yeah.
That's just creepy. It's like the killer wanted to leave a twisted calling card. Messing with the investigators, that level of cruelty, it just makes this whole thing even more horrifying.
Right. It suggests planning. Like they wanted to not just kill, but to dominate, to control the story, even afterward. But, it's important to remember, this is just Eatwell's theory. It's a good story. It connects some interesting dots, but there's no hard proof.
Right, of course. But it's a new way to look at the case, especially with someone like Hansen maybe being involved. Makes you wonder just how much corruption there was in LA back then. But before we go too far down that road, what about that other suspect? The one whose own son thinks he did it, Dr. George Hodel.
Ah, yes, the Hodel theory. Now that one is both compelling and incredibly disturbing.
Yeah.
Steve Hodel, he's a retired LAPD detective, spent years investigating his own father.
Wow.
Convinced that he was the Black Dahlia killer.
I have to admit, the idea of a doctor, someone who's supposed to heal people, being capable of that kind of violence, it's terrifying. Why did his sons suspect him? What made him think his own father could be a monster?
Well, Steve Hurdell points to a few things. One is his father's medical training. Those cuts on Elizabeth's body, so precise, almost surgical. He argued that it had to be someone who knew anatomy, who knew how to cut like that.
Yeah, that makes a chilling kind of sense. But was that all, or was there something else?
There was more. He dug into his father's past, found some unsettling stuff, erratic behavior, a fascination with surrealist art, the kind that shows violence, dismemberment. There were even allegations that he might have been involved in other crimes, including maybe even killing his own secretary. Steve's picture of his father, it's a brilliant man, but deeply troubled, a psychopath hiding in plain sight.
Right, and then there are those recordings, the ones where George Hodel supposedly admits to it. I remember reading about those. Pretty incriminating, weren't they?
They are. They don't specifically name Elizabeth Short, but the recordings, the police had bugged his house, and in the recordings he says things like, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now." It's hard to ignore that, especially with all the other evidence Steve Hodel has gathered.
Okay, so we've got two really strong suspects, a mortician's assistant, maybe hired by a powerful club owner, and a surgeon with a dark side and maybe connected to other murders. It's a lot to take in. But let's step back for a second. What does this whole thing tell us about LA in the 40s?
That's a good question. The Black Dahlia case, it's Hollywood glamour mixed with brutal violence and rumors of corruption. It captures the dark side of LA right after the war, a time of big changes, lots of people coming to town looking for fame and fortune, but also a lot of fear and danger underneath it all. And the fact that it's never been solved, it also shows the limits of law enforcement back then. We talked about how forensics was just starting out, and the media, well, they made things harder than they helped.
And there were other cases too, right? Other unsolved murders around the same time. People must have been terrified.
Yeah, the Black Dahlia case, it's often grouped with other unsolved murders from that time.
Wow.
The lipstick murders, the Cleveland torso murders. Some people think they're connected because they were all so brutal and the victims were similar, but no one's ever proven a link.
It's a reminder that even in a place like Hollywood, a place of dreams, there's darkness too. And the Black Dahlia case, with its unsolved ending, it's a warning, a reminder that some mysteries might never be solved. But before we finish up our deep dive, I want to talk about one more thing. Why are we still so fascinated by the Black Dahlia, even after all this time?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the Black Dahlia, she's up there with the most famous unsolved murders ever. Books, documentaries, even movies. Why do you think that is? Why, out of all the mysteries out there, does this one still grab us? I think it's a lot of things. You've got this young, beautiful woman, dreams, aspirations, all cut short. And it happens in Hollywood, a place that represents both the allure and the dark side of fame, you know?
Yeah.
And the way it happened, the crime scene, the staging, those letters, it all adds to the mystery. And then there's the fact that we still don't know who did it. That question, who killed Elizabeth Short, it just hangs there. It makes you want to figure it out, to find some kind of answer.
It's like a puzzle, but with a missing piece.
Yeah.
And we can't help but try to fill it in. Do you think, realistically, that we'll ever know for sure who did it? Or is this just going to be a cold case forever?
It's hard to say. So much time has passed, witnesses are gone, evidence, well, it gets lost, it degrades. But I wouldn't say there's no hope.
No.
Cold cases get solved all the time. Sometimes it's DNA, sometimes new witnesses come forward, or sometimes it's just looking at the old evidence in a new way.
So there's always a chance, even with a case like this. But even if we never find out who killed her, I think there's still something to learn from all of this, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Every case, solved or not, it tells us something about people, about how our justice system works, about the world we live in. The Black Dahlia, this case especially, I think it makes us think about how the media shapes our views, the danger of just wanting the most sensational story. And it reminds us to have some empathy when we look at these cases, to remember the victims.
It's easy to forget, behind the headlines, the gory details, that there was a real person, a life that was lost, a family that still hurts. Well, I think we've reached the bottom of this one, a fascinating dive, even if it was, well, a little disturbing. Any final thoughts for our listeners as they go and explore this case for themselves?
I'd say go in with an open mind, but be critical too.
Right.
Don't just take the most shocking story at face value. Look at the evidence. Listen to different viewpoints. Remember that the truth, it's usually more complicated than we think. And most importantly, don't forget the human side of it all.
Well said. And for our listeners, if you're hooked on the Black Dahlia, keep digging. Read those theories, look at the evidence, maybe even come to your own conclusions. But as you do, remember to be respectful, to think about Elizabeth Short and her family and the tragedy of her story. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, a case that still fascinates and haunts us all these years later.